Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Virtual Career Conference. My name is Kelsey Schultz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Career Education Manager for the College of Liberal Arts. I, however, am also a co-facilitator and host for today's session that I'll be co-presenting with Sarah O'Donnell, who uses she, her pronouns and is the Assistant Director for Education Abroad. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, but I just want to briefly give you an overview about the conference and ways that you can engage with us in this session. So first, it's an hour-long session. We're going to go until 4 p.m. So it's pretty interactive. We're going to have time for questions, or if you have any resources that you're looking for, we promise that we'll follow up with those. But this is also episode 5 of What the Future Wednesday webinars, which are College of Liberal Arts career coaching sessions. So again, I will link to all the recordings at the end, but if this is your first time or your millionth time coming to one of these webinars, welcome. Like I said, this session will be recorded, so just keep that in mind, but you can always use the chat box if you have a question throughout the session. So in that chat box, only I will see what you post in there. So I will make sure that your questions get answered. And then again, if we can't address it in this session, we'll follow up afterwards. And if you're like, but I have to go, or I missed other sessions from the Virtual Career Conference, I promise that I'll walk through how to find that link at the end. So like I said, this will be recorded. You have access to those. I'm going to put a link in the chat box now so that you can find those. But again, we're so excited you're here. We want you to change the world. This was a personally requested topic on the College of Liberal Arts Instagram, so that's why we prioritized this topic today. And who better to talk about it than someone from Education Abroad? So I'm going to pass it off to our amazing guest speaker today, Sarah O'Donnell, and we're going to just take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you to Kelsey for that great introduction. I am really excited to chat with you all. I just wanted to sort of reiterate that I'm really open to taking any questions as they come up. I am relatively new to Zoom as a platform, so Kelsey gave me some great tips, and hopefully that goes well, but bear with me through any sort of tech hiccups. Hopefully you are all now seeing a screen with international global job search information on it. I put forth what I thought would be really interesting for you, but again, if there's anything that's not being hit on, feel free to sort of let me know and we can go from there. All right, so just a brief introduction of myself again. So I'm Sarah. I am the Assistant Director for Education Abroad here at CSU. I've been at CSU for a little over 4 years, and I've been in the field of education abroad for about 12 years. So with my role, I do a lot of different things, but the thing I love the most is working with students to identify international internship and research opportunities. So I'm happy to talk about those. But in previous roles I've had within the office, I was also our returnee and alumni support person. So happy to talk about future opportunities after CSU as well. All right. So what the future international? Great question, super relevant to everyone, and I think something that we are all thinking about right now. And I wanted to just sort of address where we're at, where CSU is at, where the world is kind of at. I will say that, of course, I'm not an expert on everything, specifically with regards to COVID and the worldwide pandemic. Things are changing day by day, hour by hour, and wow, so much week by week. But what we're looking at for CSU right now is we are hopeful that we will be running the majority of our fall programs. CSU is really committed to international experiences, and we're getting a lot of support. But of course, our student safety and well-being and the safety and well-being of our partners is always going to be our #1 priority. We are seeing some really cool, innovative efforts made by our partners. So had you asked us in March if our partners could have taught classes international or online, they would have said no. But just like CSU, they're all finding ways to do that. So we are hopeful that things will continue to open, that governments will open their borders, that visas will be processed, that experts in the sciences will tell us that it is indeed safe. We are planning hopefully for the future, but also planning with backups and some innovative ideas, which is what I wanted to talk to you about today. But we do still really think that we're seeing that the world is one place, that we're unified, and this pandemic is affecting all of us, and that as a reality means that we are as much as ever interested in engaging with our friends overseas and finding ways to work together. So I think that this is super, super relevant. All right. So one of the biggest innovations that I've seen that, again, in March, didn't even exist. And when it first came out, we were like, what does that mean? Do we like this idea? Are we comfortable with this idea? And we weren't even sure, was this concept of virtual internships. And virtual internships are what we're seeing as kind of a response right now to a lot of different things. So summer internships have always been pretty popular. Great opportunity regardless of what you're studying or where you might want to go. We're seeing more and more ways for students to intern abroad. But this summer, we're not sending students abroad, and our partners overseas are not able to accept students. So what we found are these really creative international virtual internships, and I'm going to get into a little bit of that and provide some resources and ways that you can look into these more specifically. Again, happy to take any questions, especially as I get into this, but I just wanted to say that virtual internships, I think, are a great example of how creative people have been in response to the situation, because they literally founded something that didn't even exist and have really made these robust and interesting programs. So what is a virtual internship and how would that work? There are a variety of different options, and each different option has a slightly different format, but there's a lot of things that remain consistent. One of those is virtual internships. Sort of the easiest and most direct way to get a virtual internship would be to work with a partner organization. So with that, you would apply to the partner organization, you would submit your resume or CV, which is a European version, most commonly, of a resume. There might be additional application materials. You might write a cover letter, you may not. You may need a reference letter, you may not. This is where it can depend on the different organization. But basically what happens is that you apply to an organization and they really facilitate the process for you. So what they're going to do is going to take your skill set and your interest area, and they're going to match it with a company or organization abroad that is looking to host a virtual intern. Some important elements of these: they are almost always unpaid, so that is something to be aware of. International internships typically are going to be unpaid, and that's largely because of the requirement for a work visa. In order to be paid, you do need to have work authorization, and that's not typically something that would be available in a short-term stint or to an undergraduate student. So do be aware that they are unpaid, but they can often be used for academic credit. And there is a number of academic credit options. I can work with you and your academic department to figure out how to bring academic credits in as transfer credits. Or you could work directly with your academic department and register for class through your department. It's kind of fascinating, similar to the way that the companies might have slightly different application processes. Academic departments have different ways to award credit for internships. So that will be an individual case-by-case and department-by-department situation, but it's pretty much a universal possibility that we can make international internship credits happen. There is a cost facilitated with these direct programs, and the reason for that is that there's professionals like myself that work for education abroad organizations that actually facilitate the process of making those employer connections, of receiving your application materials, and of guaranteeing you a placement in your field. So there are costs associated with this, but there is also a guarantee. So there's pros and cons to every option and alternative, and that's going to be true whether you're going international or staying domestic, whether you're doing an opportunity like a virtual internship or not. You got to weigh out what makes the most sense for you. The easiest isn't always the least expensive, but it can be exactly the right fit depending on the student. The guaranteed placement, of course, is huge. So with these internships, rather than compete against fellow students as you normally would for an internship or a job posting, they are able to work with you to guarantee that they will place you into your field of study. It does require some degree of flexibility. So if you are, let's say, a political science major and you're looking to do an internship and you very specifically want to intern for a particular Irish senator, we can't necessarily say, okay, you have a political appreciation for this senator and we're going to guarantee you that you're placed with that particular person. But what we can typically say is, okay, if you're looking to do some sort of government-oriented position, that we can indeed find you something that is related to that field. The nice thing with any internship, I think, is that work experience is valuable. And even if it's not exactly what you set out to do, any experience is both a resume builder and also a life skills builder. I was fortunate. I did 2 internships when I was a student. I did intern with a state senator. I'm from New York, so I interned with a state senator in New York. I thought I wanted to go into politics. It was a really great experience because it turns out I absolutely did not want to go into politics. But I learned that through that internship, and I learned a lot of professional skills right along with it. I also studied abroad in college, and then I interned with the international office at my university. Just needed a work-study job, and I was qualified, so I got that one. Turns out that it became my real professional passion and something that I absolutely loved, and those were both through internship experiences. As you are evaluating these different virtual options, I wanted to point out that now that they've gone virtual, that there's some really unique programmatic aspects to them. So one thing that is different is that through the virtual internships, we've seen 2 different formats, and one is an individual internship. And so what that looks like would be kind of what I would think of as an internship, that you would be directly interning for a company or organization. They would assign tasks for you. You would be working through those, but in a virtual format. Most of us in the world right now are working virtually, so it's pretty relevant to what real work experience looks like. But a cool thing that is being added as an option that I really like is this idea of a group project internship. And the idea there is that they are bringing together students from different backgrounds. So let's say we've got a student who's a computer science major, we've got our political science intern, we've got a fine arts intern with a graphics background, and we have a social work intern. And the 4 of them are going to bring together their unique skill set, and they're going to work for an organization that maybe, let's assume that it has like a social programming focus. Maybe they are going to put together their unique skill sets and provide something to this organization, because we're always going to work with people across different divisions, across different units with different focus areas. And so the group project, I think, is really quite interesting because it gives you an opportunity to work cohesively on a specific project, but with people from different industries in order to complete sort of a bigger task. The length of time for a typical international internship is going to be 8 weeks or longer. With the virtual format, we're seeing as well sort of a new option of doing a 4 or an 8-week placement, which I think is really interesting because, again, it's going to be very focused on a specific project, a specific outcome, which will work well because then you'll have something very direct to put on your resume. You'll have something very direct to speak to in an interview. So the length of time really depends on the depth of the project. And it gives people an option of having some different choices. Another aspect that is kind of fun and interesting is that a lot of times students would come in my office and they would say to me, Sarah, I know that I want to go to Hong Kong. I'm really excited about the idea of Hong Kong. Here's what I'm studying. Can we find me a placement that works in Hong Kong? And we would work very hard to figure out if we could find the right industry for the student in that specific location. But a lot of my students started with location. The interesting thing about these virtual internships is now that they're virtual and you're not physically going to a different location, a lot of times they're really focusing on the industry placement as opposed to the location. So different virtual opportunities are available for different programs. We are certainly seeing a heavy amount of opportunities available in English-speaking countries. Australia being a big leader in virtual opportunities, very tech innovative country and culture. And remote working has been very, very popular in Australia for a long time, especially to like the independent workstations where people maybe are just renting a desk space as opposed to having a full office and things like that has become very popular in Australia. So going virtual is something that has worked really well for their culture. So that's one thing to be aware of. You could still say, hey, you know what? I know I want to be in Asia. I know I want to work in this specific area. And that could help to direct your choices as you're evaluating different program options. But be aware that it might also be like, okay, you are a sociology major and we have this really amazing opportunity for a sociology major and it happens to be in Chile. Language barrier, of course, will be always get our languages this summer at least. Maybe in the future we'll have more options, but right now it's all going to be English language focused placements. So something to be aware of. Even if English is not the spoken language of the country, your internship experience will all be in English. Okay, so a couple of important details. Summer 20 deadlines are approaching quickly. So if you are thinking about a summer 20 experience, I would encourage you to definitely, and I'm going to give you some options in just a moment, but keep that in mind so that you're working towards a pretty quick deadline. And also, though, we do see more options opening for the fall. So if you're planning to be physically on campus in the fall, but you like the idea of an internship, you like the idea of doing something virtual, there are a couple fall virtual internship opportunities as well. This is the first time that we've ever done this as an industry, so it'll be interesting to see. I'm hopeful that it, of course, will go really well, that there will be interest, that there will be good placement opportunities, that students' experiences will be positive, and that this will continue. But we just don't know yet. So what I can speak to for sure is summer and fall, and hopeful that there will be virtual internships available as things go on in the future.
Sarah, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
First, I just want to acknowledge, so the first question was, where are resources that we can learn more about this? And Sarah's about to walk through those, so you'll learn more about CSU resources. And the second question is, do we still have to pay if it's virtual? Is the fee still the same, or do we get a discount for doing this virtually?
Great questions. Yes. So I am going to get into a lot more specifics in just a moment. Yes, there are costs associated with these, but they are significantly discounted. So the cost of doing an international internship typically includes your housing, your visa support, some in-country resources, emergency 24/7 emergency support, things like that, that just aren't necessary with this. So the cost of these are significantly less expensive than the cost of doing an 8-week internship internationally. So there is still a cost, and the cost does depend on the program. So I will say that it is significantly less. All right. So in terms of academic credits and things like that, I would really encourage you to probably schedule an individual meeting with me. Because this is so new, it is outside of sort of our normal process. So we're going to be learning together, but we have at least one student who's already moved forward with this opportunity in the College of Business. So we've started to figure out exactly what this looks like and how this is both similar and different to our traditional international internship options. But I am happy to meet with you, and I'm going to show you on our website how you can go about requesting a meeting with me. Okay, so I'm not going to go into these in a whole lot of detail, but I do want to make sure that everybody has access to these links after. I've listed out 4 organizations that we currently work with and we know run really strong traditional international internships, and they've been really innovative with how they're going to convert those to a virtual format. The first one, ISA, I do want to point out that their application cycle closes May 1. I think that if you expressed interest but needed a few more days, that they likely would be able to work with you. The other ones, CEA, Kappa, and the intern group, all have more time, but still anywhere from like a mid-May to a mid-June application deadline. And I believe that they're kind of in the order of their application deadline. So you could certainly look and compare and contrast both financially and the model that they're using and the locations and the different industries that they have available. But you'll find that these are 4 similar and yet unique options, and you could look into each one of those. I also want to give you some information about things besides virtual internships. So I'm going to go into some post-grad opportunities. I do think that a lot of this is going to be relevant for those of you that aren't graduating yet, things to plan ahead for, things to consider for the future. And for any May 20 grads we have, congratulations, you're nearly there. And these might be some really great resources for you to use immediately. So a couple of things that I wanted to touch base on. I do often meet with students that are getting ready to graduate, and they let me know that they're really interested in working internationally. I get it. I agree with you. I think that's awesome for those of you who have had an education abroad experience and want to go abroad again, for those of you who've maybe traveled independently, or for those of you who've never left the country but know that you're interested. Working abroad could be a really, really cool way to consider that. I'll be honest with you, it is not the easiest way to get abroad, and that is really because of immigration concerns and considerations. So immigration requirements about how long you can be in a country, and what you're allowed to do is case by case for every country, and it's the US's relationship with that country typically. So when international folks come into the US, they have to enter under certain conditions, and they're allowed to do certain things. They might be allowed to study but not work. They may be allowed to stay here for 10 days or stay here for 90 days or stay here for much longer than that. Employment regulations can be tricky. Typically, when you're looking to do something employment related, it's going to be with a pretty major corporation, because they're going to need to have a robust HR and legal team, because the company, in order to hire someone from the US, would need to go through a variety of legal steps on their part. So just keep in mind that there are employers that are like, yeah, great, we'd love to work with an American, we'd love to have you come over. Internships can typically work with really small companies, but once you get to actual employment, a lot of times even the company abroad doesn't have any idea what the process is. So it's really, really important that you vet and vet and vet, and you really need to be working with an immigration attorney from that country in order to accept any sort of a job offer. Other important considerations, of course, competition is a reality everywhere. So in my experience, I found that it's often the easiest to get a job when I live in a place, and I've started to build out some connections. It's not the only option. I moved to Colorado specifically for a job from New York. Didn't have any local connections, so it's doable. But keep that in mind, that you are going to be competing with locals that don't have to go through this immigration process in order to have work eligibility. Networking and making connections are, I think, always going to be the best thing that you can do. And I do think that the Career Center has all sorts of great resources about networking and making connections and things like that. So I'm going to defer back to the Career Center folks and, you know, let them be the experts. And then the other thing is just to think about the finances and the cost of moving abroad, both the physical moving, the immigration resources that are going to be required, and different things like that. So those are some thoughts about working abroad. That to say that there are really great ways to look at going abroad, and some that are a little bit easier, that may not have initially been what your idea was, but these can be sort of gateway opportunities to get yourself abroad, to build up those connections and that network. And that's what I want to talk about really briefly, which includes teaching abroad, some working abroad resources, Peace Corps, and graduate school options abroad. So I'm going to try to pivot.
Oh, we do have one more question.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, so someone said, if coronavirus ends this summer, will there be a possibility to work abroad? How can we know about the future? Or what would you recommend planning knowing that coronavirus is a thing right now?
Absolutely. So I am really hopeful for all of us and for the whole world that coronavirus does end, or that we find, you know, the appropriate vaccinations and treatments and things like that. What I'm going to show you now would be resources that I think are going to be valuable, whether you're able to look at this immediately, or you're able to look at this in 3 months or 6 months or a year from now. I do think that all of this is still relevant and true, and the change is just the timing. But most of these things for international do require quite a bit of timing. So the virtual internships, I think, are a great option for this summer. But if you're looking for an opportunity that's going to start immediately, just know that it's probably going to take several months of time investment before you can move on that. And so on the positive side, that gives our health professionals an opportunity to figure out some more of the details around Corona. But anything international is not going to be a super fast pivot. If you just, you know, if you're looking to just go on a vacation and travel and explore, those are wonderful things. And when things open up, that is something that you can move on really quickly. But in terms of work or long-term opportunities, those are going to take time and investment in your part to make that happen. Okay, so just to clarify, are we currently seeing the are we seeing the EA website or the PowerPoint screen?
We are seeing the fabulous EA website.
Wonderful. Okay, I've zoomed correctly then. Okay, so from our EA website, we have all sorts of information on here, but what I wanted to point out was the returning to CSU section and the post-graduation international opportunities. These are valid resources for anyone, including people who haven't had an education abroad experience, but some really good details in here. And what I mentioned was that I wanted to just at least give some highlights on teaching abroad, working abroad, Peace Corps, and graduate school. So I'm going to hop into these presentations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but at least give you some important information here. So what you'll find is good information about these resources. And what I wanted to show you about teaching abroad is just kind of the basics and things to be aware of. Teaching abroad is often a really great opportunity because you are highly qualified as native English speakers with a bachelor's degree. You will likely be qualified to teach all over the world. And even before, if you were to take on this opportunity before you finished your bachelor's degree, that would be allowed in certain places. So when we say teach abroad, it can look like a lot of different things. I taught abroad. I taught in Colombia. I taught English. I had no background in teaching, and I don't know that it was necessarily my greatest success, but it was a fun opportunity. I was able to find a program where I taught English abroad for 6 months. It gave me an opportunity to live in Colombia, to have Colombian roommates, to live this really authentic experience. And I was paid enough to cover all of the costs of my living. So for me, it allowed me to live abroad and break even. And that was really wonderful. So where can you teach? You can teach all over the world. Pretty much every country is going to have some sort of an opportunity, especially non-English speaking countries. Who are the students? Depending on the format, it can look like a lot of different things. You could be teaching children, you could be teaching in a university, you could be teaching business professionals. And again, it's really relying on your, most of the time, unless you're an education major, it's usually relying on your English language skills. Programs can have a ton of structure and support and guidance and things like that, or virtually none. So depending on the level of independence you want, you can find something that has tons of content or a lot of freedom. My experience in Colombia, I taught about 12 hours a week. I had an incredible amount of freedom, and it worked really well for me. It doesn't have to be exclusively English, but I would say that that's usually the easiest transition to make. But let's say that if you have teaching credentials, you might be able to teach in something else. Qualifications can really depend on, again, what country you're in. Typically, the more qualifications you have, the higher you're paid. So that is something to be aware of. Teaching opportunities often are paid. There are certainly volunteer opportunities, but I would encourage you to explore an opportunity that you get paid. You won't necessarily get paid a lot. I didn't bring any money home from Colombia, but it did cover my rent and my travel opportunities within the country, and my cost of living was completely covered. If you are looking at teaching abroad as an opportunity to make money, it can be very common to try to pay off college debt through teaching abroad, I'd really encourage you to look into Asia. The teaching requirements within China and Korea and Japan do potentially require some more qualifications, although those can be acquired online, and definitely requires more work. My experience, like I said, was 12 hours a week in Colombia. But if I were to go to Japan on the JET program, for example, I would be working significantly more, but I would also be making significantly more money. And visas really depend on where you're going and the exact regulations of that country. So lots more information about teaching in this presentation, broken up mostly by country with some good details, but just to let you know that I never really wanted to be an English teacher, but I wanted to live abroad. And for me, this is the way that I did it. So that is one of the many options that you could consider.
We have one question.
Great.
Do you have to pay rent deposits and have a place to live ready for when you get there, or would they generally help with that?
Ooh, good question. Totally depends, and I guess that sort of speaks to the degree of structure. So the program that I did, we had like a 2-week teacher boot camp that was pretty intense and kind of wild, where we learned all about English language and how to teach it. And then the organization, so I taught for the Colombian government. The Colombian government paid for me to stay in a hostel, in a shared hostel room for a month. And then I found my own apartment. Other programs are going to provide housing from the very beginning, and some programs won't provide any degree of housing whatsoever. I would encourage everyone, regardless of what you're getting paid, to go into the experience with enough money to cover your expenses for a minimum of a month. It's going to take a while. There's going to be some sort of a hiccup. You will, I do think that they honor the contract. So I got the payments that I was supposed to get, but I probably didn't get paid for 2.5 months. So do consider that you don't want to go in totally without any resources. But the exact housing option can depend. I will say most of them are going to have, at a minimum, sort of a teacher network or a connection base, a suggestion for how to look for housing. All right. So the next thing I wanted to point out was just our work abroad section. In here we have leveraging education abroad in the job search. So this is for those of you who have had either an education abroad experience or an international experience, and ways to consider really putting that forth in your resume and your cover letter and your elevator pitch, in your responses to questions. Again, all things that I think the Career Center are really the experts on, but we just want you to consider ways in which you can incorporate that international experience into those high quality materials. I wanted to just point out that particular New Zealand, Ireland, and Australia have some really great options and really easy access points. Australia and New Zealand in particular, it's much, much easier to get these visas under the age of 30. So they are literally looking for people to come to their country, and they make it quite easy. And the idea here is really to go and work sort of in the labor or service industry. So typically you're going to get more of like a minimum wage salary, but over there that is typically $16+ an hour. So you can afford to be a barista in a coffee shop and make a living wage. Not again going to save a ton of money, but enough to live off of those experiences. And that's a very popular thing to do in both Australia and New Zealand, and a great way. They also have very easy or significantly easier bridge programs into citizenship. So if you go over on these immediate visas, there are ways in which you can continue to work and get into a more professional field. It's maybe not going to happen immediately, but there are sort of bridging programs, and the government actually wants you to stay. The Dad Rise program is a STEM education program, and it's funded STEM research by the German government. The professional program is for graduate students, but there's also an undergraduate student opportunity for any student that's in the STEM fields. So again, if you're looking at work abroad, these are some opportunities, some programs, some sort of direct access points that we think are much easier to facilitate than just applying for a job directly and working through all of the process without any resources. The Peace Corps is something that CSU is really, really invested in and really proud of. We rank really high with the number of students that participate in the Peace Corps. We have a Peace Corps recruiter, and so we have a great opportunity with the Peace Corps. There's some basic information here, and from here you can meet with the Peace Corps recruiter and find out what that process looks like. We've got some real experts, and we love being in the top 15. And we have a lot of alumni actively serving, and there's an active return Peace Corps group on campus as well, or several professionals at CSU that are Peace Corps volunteers. So some really cool connections there.
I have one brief question that came up. They said, do we really need travel insurance?
Well, travel insurance is a great question, and it encompasses a lot of different things. So when we think about travel insurance, there's a couple different categories, some of which you 100%, in my opinion, need, some that are going to be required by immigration requirements, and some that are worth really considering. So the one that I think absolutely you need is medical travel insurance. So your medical insurance that you have here in the States is not going to cover you, or at least not completely, while you're abroad. So baseline medical insurance is included in all education abroad programs, and then we really want you to look at it for yourselves. There's a lot of different companies out there. It's pretty affordable. Usually travel insurance is like less than $50 a month, maybe way less than that, depending on the company that you go with. There's two that I personally use that are aside. Our university has a travel insurance contract, but when I am just traveling for my own personal vacation, I use one of two companies. One of them is called World Nomads. For those adventure enthusiasts that are going to do, extreme sports or go hang gliding or things like that, World Nomads has really good insurance, and it includes a lot of adventure things, and they even have like tiers in which you can indicate what activity you're doing and whether they'll cover that or not. I find it very accessible. And then the second one that I use that is, you can buy it for like a whole year at a time. And if you know you're going to do a lot of traveling, I find it to be more financially helpful and still really great insurance. And that's called iNext. So lowercase I next. And so medical insurance, absolutely. One of the things that medical insurance typically includes is evacuation. So if you were to get sick while you're abroad and need to return to the United States, that they could help you with that. There is a pandemic exception almost always. So be aware that, no insurance covers absolutely everything. Insurance is tricky. It's one of the least fun parts of adulting, if you will, but it is really important and really valuable. And medical insurance, I would say, is 100% yes all the time. I'm a pretty risk tolerant person, but whenever I travel, I buy medical insurance. The second type of insurance is trip cancellation insurance, and that's where it's a real mixed bag. Yes, there is trip cancellation insurance, and you can use that, and it can be like a good option to protect yourself, but it has a ton of exclusions. It can be really tricky. It can be very, very expensive, and rarely it actually works for you. So personally, I don't often purchase that, but it just kind of depends.
Okay, and then we have one more question. When do you have, or when will Peace Corps be active again? Is there any indication of when that will be? And have you heard any implications so far about Peace Corps particularly?
So right now, to my knowledge, I believe all of the Peace Corps volunteers were brought home during this situation. We are still actively recruiting for the Peace Corps. So the exact date that it's going to open, I don't know. Exactly what the budget is going to look like, I don't know. But there is every expectation and understanding that the Peace Corps will continue to take on new volunteers, and that the Peace Corps will continue to function. And that's, a very important part of our U.S. diplomatic input in the world, our footprint, if you will. So I don't have an exact date for you, but I anticipate that it will be moving forward sort of as quickly as possible, maybe as early as this fall, but I know that they are still, we are currently hiring for our new recruiter, and that's positioned through the Peace Corps. So I know that the Peace Corps is hiring recruiters, which is a really good sign that the Peace Corps is planning to hire more volunteers.
And then one last question. Do you think CSU is still allowing students to study or work abroad in China?
So we are evaluating each location case by case, and this summer we are not allowing students to go abroad. That was a really hard decision, but we decided ultimately that it was the right decision, partially because a lot of countries aren't letting foreigners in right now. A lot of visas aren't being issued. A lot of countries have their borders closed, things like that. For the fall, we are very hopeful that we will be sending students abroad. We are making the decision based on, so fall programs in the Southern Hemisphere typically start earlier. So their school year often starts in July. So we are going to be making the decision about Southern Hemisphere programs in mid-May. We are going to be making the decision about Northern Hemisphere programs, including China, in July. But we are evaluating every country independently. And I think that we have a variety of ways in which we evaluate countries. So we have our medical insurance has a whole risk management side to it, the Department of State. We do lots of work with the fellow universities in Colorado to share resources. We have an international risk manager on our team. We do lots of evaluations, but every country is looked at equally, and we'll look at China the same way that we'll look at Spain, and the same way that we'll look at Chile, and case by case. All right, so one more that I just wanted to point out real quick as a resource. Anyone who's considering graduate school might want to consider graduate school abroad. What we have here is just a list of things that we really think are valuable to consider. And it's more questions. We don't have the answers for you, but these are things that we want you to look at. So what are your goals? What are you really hoping to achieve? What are your career aspirations? Does grad school make sense for you as a first question? And then if grad school makes sense, how does the international component impact that? Academics, where are you qualified to go? What are the admissions requirements? Will your degree be considered and hold the same validity when you return to the United States, if that is your goal. Things like that. Admissions requirements, again, those may look very different in other countries. Language skills. Don't limit yourself just to English-speaking countries. There's lots of English-speaking graduate degrees in non-English-speaking countries. So there are many opportunities. If you happen to speak a second language, amazing. But if you don't, just be aware that you don't have to only look at English-speaking countries. Germany and Scandinavia, for example, non-English-speaking countries with very high proficient levels of English and free graduate education for the most part. So you can really look into other options. Costs. What does the program cost? What is the access to things like financial aid and scholarships? These two things sort of go together. Creating a budget, reviewing tuition and fees, considering housing, considering things like assistantships and like what is available. You might find that there are programs that are less expensive than going to grad school in the US. And then certainly you will find that there are programs that are going to be more expensive than going to school in the US. So just to be aware that the cost structure can be very different internationally. So lots of things to consider, but Europe, love them. They often don't charge tuition. That's pretty amazing. It doesn't mean tuition is the only thing that you need to pay for, but it can, you know, if you have to increase your travel costs, but you can offset that with tuition, sometimes things that you don't think are available to you might be. FAFSA and federal aid work in a unique way. So there are places internationally that you can use FAFSA, that you can take out loans for grad school the same way as if you were going here in the US. And then there are other places that you cannot do that. So you do want to look into whether a school is Title IV eligible, because that would allow you to use your FAFSA funding. Transferability, again, what degrees are accepted, what does certifications or licensures look like? And then also, how does your industry respond to an international degree? For some of you, getting a degree internationally might elevate the status of your degree and make it more desirable. And for some of you, it's going to really be seen as a second tier option. They would much prefer for you to get a US degree. What are your visa requirements? Again, those are going to be set by the country that you're going to, and the universities that you're looking at will be the experts. We do have lots of resources and links here, so for those of you that are considering these, definitely looking through some of these different resources would be my suggestion. There is a whole presentation about graduate school options, and you can look into that and get some feedback. We have had people on my team in particular, probably an area where an international graduate degree is looked on very positively is in the field of international education. Not a big shocker there. And so many of us have graduate degrees. Some of us have them that are domestic, and some of us have those that are international. I will also say that a lot of graduate programs abroad are a little bit shorter and a little bit condensed. A lot of countries have a 3-year bachelor's degree and a 1-year master's degree, compared to the US system of a 4-year bachelor's degree and what is often a 2-year graduate degree. So the speed at which you can go can be a big factor as well. All right, now I'm going to hop over to our international our International Student and Scholar Services page, because I want to share some resources related to COVID for our international students. And I have it directly linked, but I think it'll be easier to navigate this way. So from our ISSS website, I just wanted to point out that they have lots of resources, including a whole section around employment, and different things to consider and be aware of. But what I wanted to point out immediately is that they do have updates related to COVID-19 and what that means for our international students and scholars, the impacts it has on immigration and all sorts of different things. So there's an FAQ section and a resources section. The International Student and Scholar Office, similar to Education Abroad, we're all doing virtual meetings. We would always rather have a virtual chat with you than respond to our email. So by all means, please schedule appointments with us. We would be so delighted for that to be the case. And with that, I'm just going to hop back over to the Education Abroad website and show you the process to schedule an appointment with us. So we have all sorts of information here and different updates and things like that. And what you can actually do is, of course, we've changed around our website, but the Getting Started section will allow you to see the things that are important, and you can contact us. And we'll just happily schedule a meeting with you. So we do a Teams meeting typically. Remote advising is something that we are very happy to do. All right. I am going to, I don't know if
we see your lovely face now. Hi.
Trying to hop back over, oh boy.
To the slides?
To the slides, yes.
Awesome.
Here, for looking at all things Job Search International.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment. Alrighty, everybody. So again, tons of resources were just shared, and the reason why Sarah and we had talked about this session beforehand. We wanted to prioritize showing those websites because those will be the most live, updated things that you can look to. Like she was saying, whether it's tomorrow or 6 months out, because some of you might not be ready to engage deeply in thinking about this, but knowing like that there's timely deadlines and things. So resources. This is what the Career Center is all about. I am a huge fan of GoinGlobal, and I'm going to briefly walk through it. And I'm also curious about Sarah's perspective on some of the topics that I'm sharing here. But this is the Career Center's website. So if you haven't been here, please check it out, career.collegestate.edu. If you go to Resources and Resource Center, you can find it there, or just go to the search bar and search International, and it pulls up a whole page. International careers, what? And on the International Careers page, you'll find the first thing is Going Global. So when you click Going Global, it takes you to this awesome platform. So Going Global is a platform that the Career Center invested in because we realized that y'all want to go abroad. Like you want to study abroad and you want to learn about different countries. Apparently it wants me to log in, so give me one more moment. Oh, it says I've been logged out due to an activity. Great. We're going to log in one more time. Of course. Okay, so as I said, we pay for this, so that's why you do need to go through our website. You can't just look up online.goingglobal, so make sure you do that because as you just saw, it wouldn't let me go in. But this is actually what shows up. So when you're wondering, do I want to go abroad? Like, what is this thing? I talk to a lot of students who are just really eager to get out of this country, but don't really know where they want to go, or have they're like, I'll go anywhere. And I'm like, let's narrow that down just a smidge, because that you're literally looking for any job anywhere in the world, and that's way too much. So we'll talk about that later, but my favorite part of Going Global is getting informed, right? So Sarah's talking about some real barriers and genuine things that are happening right now in going abroad. So be aware of those to help inform this decision, but also in general, learn about the countries that you maybe want to visit. So my favorite thing is on this website. It's updated quarterly, and the folks who weigh in on this are folks who are in that country, who are career professionals, who are employers there. It is super robust, and they add countries every quarter, so it's not just these folks. Somebody mentioned a couple different countries during the in the little side chat, so I'm going to just click Czech Republic for fun. So if you're like, oh, I guess not, never mind, my internet's not happy with me, I'm going to click Austria. There we go, Austria. So if you're like, I'm thinking I want to go to Austria, that sounds really cool, maybe you want to learn about Austria. So again, as a career education manager for the liberal arts, I support students in 19 different departments. There's no way we could ever know every industry, in addition to knowing every industry in every country. So this is where Going Global helps fill that gap. So when you're like, how do I search for a job in Austria? Great, maybe click on these different things. What are nonprofits there? What are different, so Sarah mentioned earlier that there's CVs and resumes. There are lots of differences depending on the country. In the US, you would never put your weight or a photo or your age, and some countries require you to do that. So these actually provide different levels and in different languages. So if you're having trouble or still building your language skill and you want to translate it, this has those samples. And again, tons of networking, financial considerations. So Sarah mentioned that. Maybe I really like the idea of Austria, but oops, how much did a gallon of gas cost, right? Or what are things I need to pay attention to? I also recognize that not everybody going abroad, we all have different identities, so we might be interacting or perceived differently by folks depending on where we go in the world. So it's important to be aware of, like, for example, as a queer person, I'm like, ooh, how do I engage in that if I'm going abroad? Where is that safe or not? Or I'm white, right? Like maybe I need to consider those identities and how it could be perceived, or as a woman, right? So paying attention to that here, and the professional quote unquote side is really important, because you don't want to make those faux pas. And again, there's a lot to consider in a virtual space about, again, like, what are the culture that I might engage with? I know it's not probably the first thing you were hoping for, right? Like y'all weren't like, yes, I want to go virtual for an internship, but there's still a lot of opportunities that are in that experience that just might be different, like still getting to use those language skills, still getting to do those things. So again, get informed about those countries that you're curious about with the country career guides. And oh yeah, there's a job board, right? So when you're like, I want a job, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I do not love the algorithm here too much. So just be aware that it's going to take a lot of patience, but it's good to be aware of some of the things you might be interested in. And if you're like, I have no idea what I want to do, great, you should come to the Career Center. But if, let's just say you're like, yes, I know for sure I want to do engineering, I'll be like, okay, boo, do you? Or maybe you're like, writing, great. Choose a country. Again, we're going to stick with the theme and click search and just see what comes up so you can see what it looks like. So again, 240 jobs. That's awesome. However, again, it does tend to like derail a little bit from writing in the meantime, okay? So again, just be clear on some of those skills, get creative with those keywords, and don't be shy about it, knowing that it'll take a little bit of patience, but it's still a great search engine. Sarah, I did get a question really briefly. Do you think that these opportunities are through a program? So like you mentioned, doing an internship through a program or not, or is there a way to vet sketchy things that come up on GoinGlobal?
Yeah, so I love GoinGlobal, and the country guides that you pointed out, I think are really amazing. And there is all sorts of things about like job interview formats and things like that. So I would say that this is great. And for those of you that might even be considering graduate school or volunteering or Peace Corps or things like that, I still think that those country guides can be really relevant. In terms of vetting the opportunity, no, these are not through programs. My understanding is that this is essentially like Indeed or these aggregate websites, and so they're pulling in tons of things, and some of them are going to be great opportunities, and some of them are not. And this is the same as job searching in the US, that it can be really difficult to vet an experience. And so what I would really encourage you to do is, if you find something that you like, dig a little deeper and really look into this. Look at the company's website. However you would vet an experience off of Indeed is how you want to vet one of these experiences. And I wouldn't assume, again, that they have a robust process for supporting internationals, but it's a really great starting point, because you got to start from somewhere. But that's how the job search feature I would look at through the eye of, it's a starting point. A personal connection, a LinkedIn CSU connection, a family connection is definitely going to be better, but this is a starting point. And it might just help you identify the types of jobs that are out there. The H-1B section, I think, is also super relevant for our international students. Again, I don't know if we have any international students on the call, but just to say that there are resources for being here in the US as well, and opportunities to sort of work through this H-1B search and have options and things like that. So I am not an expert on that side of things. I think that the Career Center and the International Student and Scholar Services Office likely have a little bit more of an eye for that, but I do know that that's on here, and I think it's really interesting.
It is really interesting. And yes, the Career Center is a good resource for that. For this tab in particular, when you're just getting started, now again, I'm mindful of time, but I want you to pay attention to these links, because literally they're going to answer any question you will probably ask me about how to navigate the page. But it tells you, like, how can I maximize this search? What are things I could look for? And it's a really fantastic resource. And again, employer directories too. So if you're like, ooh, like what? Like, what are these places? What are things that are happening in that country, it's really important to get informed, right? So again, if you're like, I will not do anything except go abroad, then you need to get informed. And I'm sure that most of you who are already that gung-ho have done a little bit of homework, but most folks don't know about Going Global, and that is like my biggest travesty. So if nothing else, just make sure you play with this website, get a little bit more comfortable with it, and just use it as one of many tools.
Going Global also has internship opportunities. So if you're seeking out full-time things, but they also have internships. This is a more like, this does require you to do the work, and it requires you to apply again as if you would be applying to a job in the US. And it lists domestic and international opportunities. So I'll say that for those of you who are like, you know, looking for a paid experience, or you are looking for a more formalized experience, or I mean, formalized isn't really what I'm trying to say, but just something that you want to seek out something directly and you want more control, and you want to specifically say, I want to work for this company, I want to do this title, that level of specific focus is going to require more work on your part. And that's where you can do this versus the programs that I brought up earlier, which are really going to facilitate the process, but also take out how specific you can be and require more flexibility. So pros and cons to all of these different resources.
Absolutely. And I will follow up with you. I believe that alumni can use Going Global. And if you are having trouble accessing it, please reach out to me via email, and I'll share that at the end, and we'll make sure that you get connected with this resource. Okay, but with that being said, we only have about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to briefly show you, if you're like, oh my gosh, how do I find a job in general? Or how do I do these things? Again, we have done several, again, of course, it boots me out. We have done several sessions for the Virtual Career Conference overall. And again, Sarah's going to share her slides in just a moment about like what resources you can still use on campus. But these are big questions, right? There's a lot to process. If you are a graduating senior, you actually have access to the Career Center. Like, you can meet with me virtually or in person if that happens again. You can meet with me for an entire year after you graduate. What? So if you're like, I cannot process this right now, I have finals, that is totally valid, but you can email us and set up an appointment for an entire year. After that year, you can meet with our alumni career coach. So you are in good hands and you are supported. We also have drop-ins Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Until the end of the semester. And over the summer, we'll have them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're not going anywhere. I'm going to be here all summer. So make sure that you're not shy about reaching out and asking for help. Okay, and then the last slide. Awesome.
There we go.
Yeah. So again, this is one of our What the Future webinar series. Next week, we're going to do, based on the Instagram poll, we're going to do what can I do with this major? But these happen every Wednesday from 3 to 4 p.m. MST. The first 10 minutes when they're not for a virtual career conference are a check-in to just be like, hi, how are you humaning? What's up? And then the rest will be about the topic. So you can come in with any question you want. But again, next week will be what can I do with this major? And I will make sure to share information for how to find that session after this. Great. And again, the rest of the recordings are on our website. So if you go to career.colostate.edu and you click resources, you see the virtual career conference. That is where this session will live and where every other session from this conference will live. So thank you so much for coming. And if you are still looking for a job domestically, we actually have employers who are still hiring students all the time, but we have one more day of Employer Connect events that you can sign up for. Just register where you did for this event. And again, I'll make sure you have that information in the follow-up. But don't be shy. These are our emails. And we are so grateful that you were able to come and ask thoughtful questions. Sarah, is there anything else you want them to know or hear?
No, just, again, I can't say enough how important I think it is to use your resources. At my university, the Career Center is right next to the international office, and I was in both all of the time. So we would love to see you. And yeah, go ahead and dig into the things that look interesting and let us know when you have specific questions.
Just go change the world. That's all we want. And you've got this. Just keep us posted. And again, just know that we're here for you. We're not going anywhere. And thanks again for coming. That is all we have.